It was during the fall of 2013 when my friends Mark, Bud, and Sean and I decided to go on a camping trip at a nearby river located roughly about a 3-hour drive from the city in the northeastern part of India. We were still in college, and back then, with the midterm exams just around the corner, we figured we needed a little time out to freshen our senses. And as each of us were quite passionate about fishing, we made it a point to let out some pressure before surrounding ourselves with books. Since we had planned it to be a short one, just a night, we decided we'd travel light, packing only the essentials along with some fishing gears to try our luck. Wanting to make the most of it, we decided to hit the road early. After picking up the rest of the guys, Sean finally pulls up his Jeep on my driveway at around 7 a.m. Excited, they help me load my luggage and gears to the trunk. Just then my dad comes out to see us off and hands me a dao, which is basically an Indian equivalent of a machete, saying we might need it to chop some woods, and jokingly states that it is always wise to have one around in case we needed it for self-defense. Sean, being the eldest among us, thanks my dad and has a little chat with him while we arranged the baggages. We moved out shortly after. We took our time on the way, making a few stops here and there to capture the moments of our little adventure, with the picturesque backdrops along the way. The state of Meghalaya is well known for its mesmerizing landscapes, nature's streets at its finest, earning its rightful title being among the most popular tourist destinations in India. 2.5 hours in, and we took a detour through a back road deviating from the main highway, passing through a rural area to get to the river. It was around 11 a.m. when we finally arrived at our destination. We were weirded out a bit to find that there was no one around. This was particularly odd because this place was like the hotspot for campers and hikers alike. But thinking otherwise, that maybe it was just one of those days, we were rather glad to have the place all to ourselves. We drove a little further along the shore and find a good spot to camp. Having found just the right one, Sean pulls over and we start unloading our gears. While we were at it, Bud notices a trio of campers just down the opposite side of the river, about an earshot away from where we were. We noticed that there was something odd with their behavior. The trio seemed distressed as they were frantically dismantling their tents, packing and loading their stuffs in the car, then driving off in a haste. Not knowing what to make of it, we all assumed that apparently they had an emergency. Mark and I proceeded with fixing up the tents, while Sean and Bud set out to gather some firewoods, figuring we can just lay them out in the sun to dry beforehand while we go out fishing. Just then we noticed a few figures along the tree lines. Turns out it was a group of women and some children from a nearby village who came to wash their clothes downriver. Mark, being fluent in the local dialect, goes on and greets one of them and tells her about our intentions. She smiles and greets me politely and turns towards where Sean and Bud were headed. She tells Mark to be careful and then goes her way. Once the tent was set up, we start unpacking and arranging our fishing gears when we hear Sean and Bud chattering over the distance, coming back with a huge pile of woods. Mark stands up and turns towards their direction, trying to mock them, but he remains still as if in a trance. Then I notice a look of unease and confusion ran across his face. His gaze remained fixated on them for a few moments before finally snapping out of it and calls out to them. Yet there was something off about his demeanor, and he looked around, scanning the surroundings, almost like he was searching for someone. When I ask him what was up, he just shakes his head and says, "Nothing," with a smile, and helps me attach the hooks to the fishing lines. When Sean and Bud finally arrived, we had just about everything organized and good to go, but Sean decides to set up the fireplace to save us the trouble later, while Mark points out that since we may run out of bait, might as well get some now. Bud decides to accompany Mark as they both grab the shovel and a bucket from the Jeep and head out towards the less sandy and more fertile grounds along the tree lines. Sean and I continue digging the patches on the ground, all the more searching and placing rocks of appropriate sizes for the fireplace. Eventually, having the fireplace set up alongside the detachable grill, dinner wasn't going to be a problem, as we had packaged frozen meat tucked safely in our icebox, alongside some beers, the treasure box as some of us came to call it. Noticing they were taking a while, Sean and I sit by the tents talking about our plans for the future of what we'd really pursue after our graduation. Just then, Bud and Mark appear out of nowhere. We were so engrossed in our little conversation that we failed to notice their arrival. We greet them, remarking their fetch. Bud seemed quite thrilled, telling us about how they got it, while Mark seemed a little distraught and disoriented. He remained silent most of the time as we had lunch. It was around noon that we finally set off to fish. We walked a few distance up the river searching for calmer waters, and we finally settled for a body of water which seemed particularly deep, likely to host potential catch. Sean then sprinkles the leftover rice from his lunchbox upon the surface of the water. Then we noticed a few fish gobbling and feasting on them in just a couple of minutes. Each of us quickly set up our fishing rods now, with a sudden rush of excitement overcoming us. It was starting to get dark by the time we decided to head back to the camp. Each of us were quite happy with our catch, as we all managed to bag about 9 to 10 hand-sized copper masseurs, quite remarkable for occasional anglers. Upon reaching the camp, we got the fire going and started cooking dinner. Bud heads towards the covers of some bushes in the distance to tend to nature's call, while we pop open a few bottles of beers as we were preparing our meal. Mark plays some music over his Bluetooth speakers, and we jammed along the tunes. I grabbed my cell phone to take a few snaps. Then we hear Bud cussing at us over the distance for starting without him. I click a few pictures of him as he makes his way back to the camp. When he finally gets back, Mark asks him if the group of villagers was still around. Bud gives him a confused look and asks, "Who again?" "The kid. Are his friends still around?" Mark goes on. "What kid?" Bud replies in a confused tone. Seeing that it was only adding up to the confusion, Mark just shoves it off, saying, "Never mind," and hands him a beer. We all laugh it off and continue gobbling down our drinks, all the while tearing pieces of the barbecued meat. After having dinner, we sit by the fire sharing some stories. It was around a few minutes past 10 p.m. when we finally decided to call it a night and hit the sack. Bud stayed up a little while longer, wanting to be the first to wish his girlfriend on her birthday. Tired from the activities throughout the day and with the addition of some alcohol, the rest of us drifted off to sleep in no time. I was having a pleasant dream when I was awoken by a sudden push, followed by Mark calling to me, crouching beside me. Still a bit dazed, I asked him what was wrong, and he whispers that there was something wrong with Bud. Still a bit drowsy, I had a hard time trying to comprehend the whole situation. I checked the time, it was 40 minutes past 12. Then I asked him what he meant. Right then Sean wakes up to our commotion and Mark goes on telling us what he had seen. Apparently he had woken up by the sound of Bud talking to someone. Assuming he was on the phone with his girlfriend, Mark decided to go back to sleep. But he noticed someone whispering as if responding to whatever Bud was saying. Curious, he gets up to check if either Sean and I, who were sleeping in the other tent, were still up with Bud. Through the netting of the tent, amidst the dimly lit campfire, he could make out Bud walking around back and forth while on the phone with his girlfriend, but there was someone else with him, a small figure about 3 feet. Suddenly realizing it was the same figure he had initially mistaken for a child, as he had caught glimpses of it over the distance throughout the day around Bud. But now, since he could see it up close, illuminated by the fire, it was clear that it was no child. The figure had disproportionate features, with arms about knee length and a long pointed nose and ears. It seemed to hop around almost in excitement on one leg, following Bud closely as he walked back and forth and mimicking his every move. When he'd sit, the little figure would crouch down next to him, but as for Bud, he seemed completely oblivious to the little figure and the whole scenario around him. Mark was completely terrified at the sight unfolding in front of his eyes. Just then Bud hangs up the call and walks towards the tent, with the figure now walking on all four, slowly following closely behind him. As Bud walks by the campfire, blocking Mark's line out of sight of the figure. He changes his trajectory as he moves away. The figure suddenly vanishes. Bud unzips the netting to the tent and kinda riddled to see Mark still up. He asks him jokingly, "You spying on me?" Laughing it off and excusing himself, claiming his phone was running out of juice, so he needed to borrow my power bank. Mark heads out towards our tent, telling us of what he had witnessed. Noticing Mark's discomfort about the whole situation, Sean decides to share the tent with Bud instead. Adding more wood to the fire, Mark and I stay for a while, trying my best to deviate his thoughts. We end up talking about his crush and how he should let her know. Mark was always the shy guy, ever since school days. We take our conversation back to the tent as it was getting late and eventually drifted off to sleep, making sure that he'd sleep before me. The next morning I woke up to the sound of someone chattering. I get up and check the time. It was around 7 a.m. Everyone else was up and preparing breakfast from the leftovers. I get out of the tent and Sean greets me with a "Good morning, sunshine." Out of frustration, I raise my fist with a finger to him, drawing laughter from the rest of the gang. We eventually had our breakfast and started loading our gear shortly after, with not a hint and almost oblivious to the occurrences from the previous night. We set out sometime around 10 a.m. Now coming back to reality with the exams coming up, our conversations back home was now mainly focused on the syllabus. We drop off the rest of the guys and it was about a few minutes past 1 when I checked my phone as I rest my rucksack on my bedroom floor. As I was in my room, I just realized my clothes emitting that pungent smoky smell, but just as I was about to take it off and take a shower, my mother calls out to me from the kitchen downstairs. As I get to the kitchen, I see that she was still on the phone with a worried look on her face, telling whoever was on the other line, "Okay, he's here now," and hangs up. She tells me that Bud's mother had suddenly fallen terminally ill, and they had to take her to the hospital, and that she was in the ICU. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I call Sean and Mark. Both of them had got the news beforehand and were planning to head to the hospital. I asked them to pick me up along the way. I took a quick shower and grabbed a few bites of lunch and head towards the driveway, waiting for the others. Hardly a minute in, Sean pulls over on his Jeep with Mark, and we quickly set out to the hospital. When we get to the hospital, we tried calling Bud on the phone, but he wasn't answering. We rushed towards the desk and asked the receptionist, who guided us and gave us directions. When we finally arrived at the waiting room, we could see Bud's family and their friends gathered across the hallway. We made our way across, while asking some familiar faces about Bud's whereabouts. Then we noticed Bud sitting across the row of chairs all alone. We head towards him. Sean calls out to him, and we notice him tearing up at the sight of us. "Thank you," he remarks, as he hugs Sean and then me and Mark. Sean and Mark try to comfort him. It was then when I noticed the doctor walking out of the door and talks to Bud's father and places his hands on his shoulder with a tight grip while shaking his head. The family around them burst to tears. But amidst all the scenes surrounding the place that was unfolding, I noticed a little figure coming out of the door. Just then Mark stands beside me and he remarks, "There," and it disappeared among the crowd. It was the same figure Mark had described back at the river, and this time we all saw it.